So within startup tech stacks, what databases are folks using and why? What drives the choices? Well, at the end of the day, the most common database that we see, and this has actually remained relatively constant and true over the last couple of years, and that is Postgres or flavors of Postgres, like you might see Supabase or something like that, but essentially Postgres or its flavors. And it's worth noting, I think everybody already knows this, but just to be clear, this, of course, is a SQL option, and it's a common open source and therefore inexpensive SQL option. That's what we see most commonly. I would say after that, in terms of individual choices, interestingly, let me note that I'll say that all forms of NoSQL then kind of combine, and that's Mongo/Dynamo are probably next. And so that's NoSQL, right? But combine all of those and you get the sort of second group. The third group after that, interestingly, is SQL Server. So that's Microsoft, right? I'll just call it MS SQL, as it's sometimes known. And that's owing to the fact that you have a certain number of shops that are Microsoft shops, and so they're going to default to SQL Server as a result. And of course on Azure, it's relatively straightforward to use that. So why Postgres? And why is that actually potentially a pretty reasonable choice? I'll note that while Postgres is number one, in some respects, if you're looking for a SQL-based database option that's high performance and open source as well, I would also note MariaDB. And MariaDB here, this I'm going to note that it's a MySQL clone, so it's a drop-in replacement, and of course that's SQL-based. But that's sort of more distant down the list, but that's an option as well. Both of these, so Postgres, MariaDB, even SQL Server, all of these SQL options, the reason they've risen back up after the surge in NoSQL interest is because most of these SQL databases are now capable of supporting large document style storage. So they're supporting large JSON objects within columns in SQL tables. They support querying into that JSON and reasonably efficiently fetching data out of it. And so you actually have a lot of NoSQL capabilities inside, that's what I should say, is that supports. So these guys support NoSQL style access. And, man, that's bad handwriting, but NoSQL style access. So that's supported here, that's supported here. All of these guys have some amount of support for that. The challenge for the NoSQL databases, for Mongo, Dynamo, etc., they can do joins kind of, sort of. They can kind of mimic SQL databases, but if we think about mimicry in the two directions, NoSQL databases do a worse job mimicking SQL databases than the opposite. So SQL databases do a reasonably good job of mimicking some of the capabilities of the Mongos and Dynamos of the world, while also giving you all the relational capabilities so that as you're, say you start out and you're building a system, it might not be for a year in, but as you grow, all of a sudden your customers start asking for various analytics and reporting, etc. And that generally turns out to be done more easily in a structured database. And so that's where the SQL players really shine. And the inverse of that, there are tools that do an okay job of helping with reporting analytics off of NoSQL. That generally has been a strength of SQL databases. And so that's why I think you're seeing Postgres as the leader precisely because it gives you the standard SQL that is the underpinning of so many systems, while also giving you a lot of NoSQL style capabilities today. Not to mention that the performance at the scale of startups that are, frankly, between 0 and 20 million in ARR, it doesn't really matter. You can get the performance you need from most of these solutions. SQL Server is probably the riskiest on performance, but with any of the others, you can get the performance that you need. And so that's why it's not going to be a huge impediment to your business. At the end of the day, you could probably choose any of the options, but I would say in this case that the market as we see it is right, and that, you're not going to make a bad choice if you stick with Postgres.